Hey, welcome back to my Valorant channel. I'm still working on some larger videos, but I thought in the meantime I would get to answering some of the questions from my subscribers. So if you're a Twitch subscriber, you get to ask questions in my Discord, and allegedly I committed a long time ago when I had a smaller channel to doing a weekly video on my YouTube channel where I would go through and answer them all. Now, have I done that? No, I haven't. And usually they belong on my other channel because they're just more like generic. It's more talking about like me as a content creator and stuff. But I actually picked out a bunch of questions that were Valorant related, or at least when they were asked, maybe they were based on based on Overwatch as well, but I've kind of translated them into Valorant questions, and I think they'd be pretty good for this channel. So, introducing the worst lower third of all time. Bang, there we go. It's a notepad file. So this is the first question that I had from a long time ago. I think this one was from like sometime in 2021 when I was doing a bit of Overwatch and a bit of Valorant as well. And it's from Messenger Wong. And they said, how is it like casting with people other than Bren, and how do you have to adjust to make sure the cast works? Now, I think this was based off some Overwatch casting that I did while Bren was, I think, ill for a little while in 2021. I can't exactly remember. But I wanted to kind of apply this more generally too, because now I've done a bunch of Valorant casting. And if you remember, if you're a Valorant fan, I actually filled in for Hypoc a couple of times at Champions because he wasn't feeling so good. So I've got some experience casting with Pansy recently, some experience casting with Doug at the start of Americas. I can't remember why we did that. Maybe Bren hadn't arrived yet or something. Or maybe Barlow wasn't there. I can't really remember why I did that. But I've casted with Doug, I casted with Pansy, and I've done a lot with Bren. And then in Overwatch League, I casted with Uber and Jaws and some other people too. I haven't watched back any of those VODs. Maybe I should do just for my own learning at some point, but I haven't been because they don't seem relevant, because most of the time I'm just casting with Bren. But I can talk you through a little bit of how it shifts things around, yeah. So usually me and Bren don't do some of the most common communication stuff that you would normally see in Valorant casting. So a lot of the time you'll see the casters kind of looking at each other, trying to get visual cues for what they want to do. Sometimes they'll use kind of hand signals for when they want to start talking, or, you know, pointing at the minimap or something. I'll point at the minimap occasionally, but I'll very rarely use hand signals, and most of the time I've just got my head buried in the minimap trying to look at what's going on. So myself and Bren don't do a lot of the normal comm stuff, which makes it a little more difficult, I think, to try and integrate myself with other people that I cast with. And it also depends if I'm filling in for their partner or if they're filling in for Bren. Because while it shouldn't really make too much of a difference, it does change the feel quite a lot, actually. For example, when I've had other people fill in for Bren, I've taken over a lot of the responsibility. Like, I'll drive the tempo, I'll drive the action, I'll drive the, like, feel of it. And on the complete opposite side of that, when I filled in for Hypoc at Champions, I let Pansy do a lot of that. Now, Pansy is very much the driver when it comes to the cast, the product that she puts forward. She likes to be in control of the play-by-play side of stuff, and she's excellent at it. So there's really no reason to try and interrupt her flow and try and make things more of a sideshow cast than I would want to fit in with her flow and her tempo in that kind of cast, because she's so excellent at what she does, and it just exists wonderfully whether or not somebody bounces off of it. So on the other side of it, you know, sometimes so when me and Bren cast, for example, in the downtime, I'll be very forceful in getting through the points that I want to get through. And some play-by-play casters actually take a lot of that kind of downtime. They like to take the downtime and suggest ideas for what they want to talk about during the downtime. Again, that's something that Pansy does a lot. Or they'll actually be commentating still the pieces of utility that are being used, despite the fact that there isn't any, you know, big site exec or contact about to happen. So it depends basically what the style of the person is that you're trying to fill in with, and whether or not you want to pull things more towards your style or let them have a lot of their style. And basically, at the end of the day, keep it simple. Like, I have excellent rapport with Bren. I know when he's about to talk, and I know when I have time to talk, because we've just done it for so many years. We've been talking, you know, casually and professionally with each other and to each other for years and years and years and years and years. So with other people that I don't have as good a feel for, it just comes down to trying to keep it as simple as possible. Like, if you would like to insert a joke, but you're not sure whether they're going to give you the space to do it, just don't bother. Just keep it simple. Keep it professional. They say something, you say something. Try and bounce. Try and find the flow with each other. Don't try and do the more technical aspects, the more difficult aspects of casting, where you're, you know, doing small interruptions or adding certain points in, or leaving things on an upward inflection so that it's kind of, you know, or varying your flow so that you could come in if you wanted to, or they can come in if they want to. Like, keep it very simple, keep it very structured, and it's normally fine working with other people. It's not as difficult as it makes out, but it does tend to be a better product when you've worked with somebody that you're super comfortable with and have good rapport with. So let's move on to another question, again asked by Messenger1, who said, what's your view on hybrid caster and desk analysts compared to specialists in either role? And this one's going to be quite detailed. So in Valorant especially, we've done a lot of... So in Overwatch, let me set the context first. In Overwatch, I worked for a period of time where I was doing just random all sorts of things while there was an open circuit. And when Overwatch League began, they signed me as a desk analyst for 2 years. So 2018, 2019, all I did was the desk. And then I moved into doing casting for 2020, 2021. And then now in Valorant, I'm doing both. So what do I think about both of the roles? Desk analyst, definitely a harder job. Way harder. You do more hours. It's more difficult to get your point across when you only have like 2 minutes to really communicate it properly. It's supposed to be synced up with what's happening on screen, and you're also responsible for building a lot of what's happening on screen too. Ideally, you actually want the same people involved all the time, like the same 4 or 5 people on the desk all the time, every day. That's how you build up rapport with the audience and get them wanting to tune in and see the same kind of feel of the show all the time. I mean, if you think about the great like desk products that you might watch, whether they be like a sports desk product or some other kind of podcast that you like tuning into, it's not constantly completely different people with a completely different feel. That's not coherent. It doesn't build any level of identity with the product at all, or a parasocial relationship if that was something you wanted to try and develop in order to really make people feel like they were part of the family in some way or part of the product. So ideally you want the same people, but then it's just a terrible job. You are literally the first people in terms of the broadcast talent. Obviously, the crew actually end up working longer jobs than we do, but at the same time, they're not required to, be on camera putting their careers on the line sometimes with what they say. So ideally you want the same people, but then it just becomes terrible. You are the first people in on a morning, and you are the last people out the door. And then even when you're the last people out the door, you still have to be building the show for the next day. So you stay another hour or two after the show starts. You're there about 4 hours before the show begins. And the shows themselves can last, 7 hours, probably, something like that. Maybe 8 sometimes. So that ends up being a very long day. You're working, something like longest, it should only be about 13, 14 hours, but sometimes it can be longer than that. And if you're doing that every day, you're going to get horribly burnt out. Some of the burden can be lifted by producers doing a lot of the producer work, which is like, what should come up on screen, what the flow of the segment is, suggesting packages of stuff that they've built. Like, hey, do you want to talk about tens here? Hey, do you want to talk about these retakes? Hey, the replay team have built you a cool slow-mo of this play. Do you want it? Like that kind of stuff. But to be honest, while that's the way that it works in a lot of traditional sports, that isn't really the way that it works in esports, at least not for many esports I've been involved in. It did a little bit towards the end of 2019 in Overwatch League, but generally speaking, producers are going to be the people facilitating what the talent want to be done. So the talent are doing a lot of the segment building, and then the producers are doing the actual technical stuff of like putting all of it together and then presenting it on the broadcast. But that just makes it an enormous amount of burden. So because the producers aren't necessarily taking the lift away in that aspect, instead it becomes rotations that take away the burnout, right? You rotate the casters onto the show in order to avoid the desk people getting burnt out. And I think that definitely leads to a worse product. Now, I have tons of different things that I could talk about how to make the product better in general, and I do frequently give that feedback to people in every esport that I work in. But yeah, it definitely, rotating people like that definitely leads to a worse product, but it's less burnout and makes it, arguably better for the long term if you're committed to this kind of way that we do things. And because the job is worse on the desk, because it's longer hours, because it's less fulfilling, because it feels like you're just trying to fill time and do sponsor segments a lot of the time too, most of the people who can try and transition into casting, if you have any interest in doing like live broadcast casting, that's where most people end up going. I mean, that's what I did. That's what Bren did. Bren was very heavily a caster before Overwatch League began anyway. But yeah, certainly for me, that's what I did. I trended towards casting, and you can see it all across the industry as well. And that means that some casters are actually better desk talent than the usual desk people. And that to me is the biggest benefit of actually the hybrid stuff, more so than just kind of filling the rotations and fixing the burnout. the fact that you get to see those people who would otherwise only be doing casting work have their own moment on the desk and create these special desk moments, that is an excellent part of rotations. But in general, I think it's a worse product, yeah. And I think it's part of why desks often come across as just filling time rather than feeling like anything coherent, is because you just rotate people so much that you don't have the opportunity to really build anything. Long term, that is. All right, let's move on. It's another question from Messenger. It's been a dry couple of years for questions. And they're asking another technical question about casting again, which I'll relate back to Valorant. We do have some other Valorant questions coming up as well. So Messenger 1 said, what's the deal as a caster? With a league you're associated with using your likeness when you're not there, and how long does that last for? Just the end of the season or even longer? So this might be a relevant question because I think this was asked at the same time as the EMEA people were talking about Carmine Core and then using pictures of me like in the broadcast and stuff when I don't work for EMEA, obviously. So the industry boilerplate language, like the classic industry standard, is that when you do like talent work like I do, the company you produce it for, in this case Riot, has the rights to any work that you produce for them, including your likeness insofar as it's related and incorporated into the service. So what that roughly means, as far as I understand it anyway, is that, you know, me, when I'm casting, they can use images of me, pictures of me to promote and advertise their product. You know, if I become really popular, they could use a picture of me casting and be like, yo, Sideshow casts this game. Isn't that crazy? It doesn't include stuff, though, like sellable merchandise most of the time. So, you know, it doesn't mean that Riot can go off and create like little, you know, plushy dolls of me, like little eggs or Sideshow mugs or anything like that. And as far as I'm aware as well, because most of the industry standard boilerplate language is to do with things being service related, in theory, you're supposed to have approval over situations where it's not service related. So, you know, if it was them using a picture of me from my stream or, you know, using a clip of me from my stream or something like that, I think in theory you're supposed to have approval over that, which I didn't for the EMEA egg joke stuff that they were making about Carmine Core, but I've never had a situation where I would have disputed or been bothered by any of that anyway. So to be honest, it's just irrelevant for me at the moment. You know, maybe if I blow up and I'm bigger than Riot, then we can have some other conversations about it, but I don't think that's going to be relevant. Now, you might have been thinking this entire time, oh, why is the lower third, this shitty notepad-looking lower third? Why is this lower third so bloody big? And it's because Uberchain asked an enormous question. So let's crack on then. In the current esports economy, what do you feel like is the way to sustain esports that does not require venture capitalists or big investments for zero sum? Bloody hell. I mean, if I knew the answer to that off the top of my head, people would be throwing the bag at me to try and fix their esports orgs, wouldn't they? But I'll give you my best shot at the question. I've thought about it a little beforehand and written down some notes so that I can properly answer this. Because this is, if you ask me this in a live interview, no way you're getting a decent answer. It's just too complicated. But I have thought about it a bit. And to follow on, in what way can esports ever profit in a way that seems ethical versus the situations involving cryptocurrency scams or regions such as Saudi Arabia purchasing esports ventures despite, to say the least, unethical and restrictive viewpoints on what esports is striving for in terms of international reach? Yeah, so I'll answer this in two parts, one for the first question, one for the second question. So one of the big problems with monetizing esports has been that you can't monetize broadcast rights at the moment, right? A lot of how traditional sports teams get their money is that they have all grouped together, at least in America with these franchise systems, they all group together, they form, you know, a central body like the NFL, and the NFL sells the rights to watch the shows and broadcast the shows to, I don't know, Fox or whatever. I don't actually know which channel it's on. I don't watch NFL. But let's say they sell it to Fox. Fox pays them a huge amount of money for the rights to broadcast it. Fox does all of the broadcasting stuff. NFL don't have to worry about paying for that or anything. They're separate entities. And they earn a lot of money from it. And then you might ask the question, follow-up question, well, why would Fox pay for something like that? Because Fox are selling adverts against it. And Fox already have an extraordinary amount of companies that want to advertise on their channel. And if they have the things that people want to watch, which sports do extremely well, traditional sports do really well on TV, especially big events like the Super Bowl, right? So the spots to advertise on that can be worth way more. And it means that the NFL themselves don't have to actively have a sales department trying to sell directly against their content. It means that they can just outsource that whilst getting tons of money from it. And broadcast rights work extremely well if you have people that are willing to pay for them. In esports, we don't have people that are willing to pay for them. Individual streamers have way larger followings than esports. And so if you're trying to sell, there were some esports broadcast rights deals. For example, Riot currently has an exclusive one in China, which is worth a huge amount of money because there are a bunch of different competing companies in China, unlike the West, really, which basically just has Twitch, and YouTube Gaming is trying to get in there a little bit, but YouTube is so heavily VOD focused that they're not really pouring money into the live side of it too much, and the money that they are putting in there is based on streamer contracts, like people like Ludwig, for example, and who else has it? The 100 Thieves guys like Valkyrie and Courage and stuff, right? I think signed to YouTube, that kind of thing. Because they're more cost effective. You don't have to pay as much for an individual, and you get huge amounts of watch time from them. So how could you fix this issue of not being able to get broadcast rights monetization for esports? Well, you could just keep growing, and eventually you'll be so big that, when you threaten to remove yourself from Twitch or from YouTube or from whatever and go somewhere else, then people are willing to pay to have you stay around. Yeah, that could be an option, but I mean, that's not really specific, is it, as a solution? Just keep growing. I mean, that's going to help with everything. So one of the other things that I think seems fairly interesting is the idea of building developer-owned distribution channels, a little bit like MLG TV was back in the day. But I think if developers get to the point where they have a couple of different IPs, like for example Riot with League of Legends and Valorant, that are both really popular, and right now both of those are, Riot in theory could have some kind of portal like LoL Esports, but let's say it was called like riotesports.com, that worked a bit like F1 TV, where you can pay a subscription and you can watch through them and you get extra content, etc. Or maybe that's like better quality or whatever it is, but trying to push people into that avenue. I think they've got many ways of being able to reward people better than even the traditional sports. When you watch on F1, on F1 TV, I should say, yeah, you get more like behind the scenes access and extra shows and that kind of stuff. But also, if Riot did something like that, you might be able to get digital goods, right? You might be able to only get certain skins if you watch through their portal, so people want to watch, and the more that you start moving those consumers, the more that you start moving the audience towards the developer-owned distribution channels, then the more that you can monetize yourself against them, because then you can sell your own ads on the platform instead of having to take a percentage cut of what Twitch is selling. Twitch is notoriously bad at selling adverts, by the way, way worse than Google is, because Google's a massive company that actually started and specialized in ad sales against their SEO system that they developed, against their search engine system. So the potential for revenue increase there is enormous, but there are definitely pitfalls in terms of trying to lock things down too many developer-owned channels and people not really wanting to watch anymore if it wasn't available on Twitch, for example, that kind of thing. One of the other important things as well in terms of monetizing esports is that there is a running theory at the moment, which I've never really seen any hard evidence for, but does seem like it's got some pretty decent thought processes behind it, is that the developers themselves are probably earning the vast amount of the revenue from esports programs, not in direct ways, but mostly in indirect ways, in terms of retention, in terms of esports viewers leading to larger... I should rephrase that. Esports viewers being the people most likely to spend large amounts of money on digital goods, right? So if you're an esports viewer, you probably spend more on skins than somebody who is just a ranked player. Again, that's a theory. I haven't seen any evidence for it, but it seems like a pretty reasonable theory as well. And that's probably one of the reasons why developers are pretty happy. I mean, Riot is pretty happy supporting the Valorant scene. They're paying a lot of money to run the Valorant scene, and they're running the League of Legends esports scene, which either seems to be profitable or just about to be profitable, depending on which interview they're talking about it in. So maybe it's hovering somewhere on either side of that, of around break even. So one of the things that the people within esports could do is pressure the developers to release more information about their revenues that's directly connected to esports. So stuff like all of the things that I've just said, digital goods, retention, that kind of thing. And trying to make sure that that revenue is equitably shared between the other partners in the space and it's not just hoarded by the developers. This is a little similar to, the way that traditional sports, the players get paid about 50% of the revenue if you're looking at really large American sports. So revenue that's coming in, about half of that gets paid out to the players. That kind of tracks in terms of like team revenue getting paid out to the players at the moment, but the developers are just kind of sitting on possibly golden eggs, and not that revenue isn't really getting shared anywhere, but at least the developers are now taking a more active role in building the ecosystems rather than leaving it all to the teams. One of the other things that esports could do much better than they're currently doing is engaging the fans in a more fervent way. Anyone who watched the most recent Carmine Core event will know that the difference between a normal esports event and that, or the difference between even, Champions and how the crowd reacted at Champions and the Carmine Core event, they're worlds apart. So when we talk about esports viewers not really being engaged enough to spend money on the product, a lot of that ends up kind of being thrown in the viewer's face of like, why are you so ungrateful? Why won't you pay for things, etc., etc. But most of the main audience of esports are core internet users who are used to having things for free, used to using ad blockers, know their way around a PC and know their way how to get that kind of stuff, and aren't just going to, randomly just start watching a bunch of ads if they can help it. Or paying for things if they can help it too. There's been a real push in the last 5 years for games as a service instead of games being a product that you go out there and buy, and that's led more and more people to have the ability to access games and get into games. But it also means that some people just don't spend any money on them at all, and they just enjoy playing them for free. But anyway, the point of that being that the more that you engage these fans, if you actually get them whipped up and really fanatic about things, then they're much more likely to spend. They're much more likely to tie their identity to what's going on and spend their money. And I think that at the moment, a lot of esports orgs are kind of half-assing that entire process of trying to get their fans genuinely excited about what's going on. They don't really understand how to get their fans more excited or how to tap into traditional sports fan culture, or even internet fan culture, to be honest. And instead, they're just kind of putting the blame on the audience and be like, why won't you pay for things? Oh, because your fan engagement is shit and your merch is shit and we just like the players that are on your team. Have you ever thought about that? E.g. or other organizations as well that are also in the same kind of boat. They could also tap into streamer culture more heavily. I mean, some of the organizations that are doing extremely well at the moment are kind of headed by streamers, by people. Streamer culture has blown up. That's what I meant when I was talking about internet fan culture as well. The building of these parasocial relationships and the building of feeling like you're connected with people through a Twitch audience because you can talk to them in the chat and have that live feedback with them in a way that you just can't with most other celebrities. A lot of orgs are not tapping into that particularly well. A lot of orgs still have kind of a faceless corporate feel to them in a world where, everything is trying to become more and more parasocial in order to, let's be honest, at the end of the day, engage the fans more and have them either watch more so that you can translate that to sponsorship sales and advertising sales, or watch more and get connected more so that they'll actually buy things and make you money in the end. So the other thing as well that a lot of esports teams have done is use the esports team as a brand builder for other ventures, whether that be some like Blitz, for example. I think TSM, God, off the top of my head, I think it's TSM that owned the Blitz app, right? And TSM, as an organization, like, using their esports side of things to kind of advertise some of their other products, one of which is the Blitz app, which generates them money and is directly hooked into people's PCs, and is immediately, open in the background while you're playing these games and suggests you tips and tricks and stuff like that. And you can go in that kind of avenue. You can go in like Louder involved in a bunch of infrastructure stuff within Brazil. There's other organizations that are involved in, more like LAN cafe kind of things and building either communities or specific intellectual property that actually has value to the organization as well, because it's an asset that can be sold or used. Yeah, sold mainly. So that there are other ventures where esports teams can diversify and make profits there. And as for the second half of the question, in what way can esports profit in a way that seems ethical versus the situations involving crypto scams or Saudi Arabian money that's coming in as well? Frankly, you just have to hope as fans, as people that don't want horrendously unethical practices involved in every aspect of our lives. Please, for the love of God, not every aspect of our lives. We already have enough. You just have to hope that by getting profits in other areas, ethics can come into play. If there's no money anywhere except the crypto scam money and the Saudi Arabian money, it's much more likely that organizations are going to dismiss any ethics that they say they hold or pretend they hold and just take the horrendous, dirty money. I mean, literally blood money in some senses. The more avenues for more ethical profits there are, the more likely it is that organizations go in that direction. On top of that, as fans, public pressure is the best tool to try and stop this behavior. If you see an organization that is, involved in certain ventures that you don't like, or taking money from sources you don't like, or acting unethically, or scamming their users, or whatever it might be, you've got to vote with your wallet and with your engagement. You've got to stop watching their videos, or you've got to, be tweeting about, raising a shitstorm about it so that there's some level of public pressure there. You have to stop buying their merchandise, stop watching their shows, stop watching your favorite esport or whatever if you disagree with what's going on there. But it also means that you have to vote positively too. Like when people are participating in ethical behavior, even if you believe that should be normalized, it also means that you have to vote positively with your wallet and your engagement there too. For example, I was talking about this on stream recently. Counter-Strike just recently, and not just Counter-Strike actually, there was a Gamers 8 tournament which was held in Riyadh, and it's a big, huge amount of money that literally the Saudi royal family is in charge of putting up, and it's part of their sports washing, what do you call it? I was going to say technique, but that's the wrong word. Sports washing regime, I suppose, to try and just flood the space with money, normalize the fact that they're involved, and stop people from talking about the horrendous stuff that the country does. They're one of the largest, in fact, they might be the worst human rights abuser at the moment, committing horrendous atrocities and have a horribly repressive society. And if you want to vote with your wallet and your engagement, you've got to make sure that if you like an esport and it holds, and some of the teams, some of the orgs, whatever, participate in an event like that, you don't watch it and you don't pay for merch and you don't engage with that kind of stuff. But then when they go back to doing other things, or, if there's a different team that didn't take part, for example, then you need to positively vote with your wallet and your engagement and kind of stuff in that way. Because otherwise, if you're the kind of person that never spends any money on esports anyway, then how is it hurting them in any way that you haven't, bought a shirt recently since they started taking Saudi money or whatever? It doesn't do anything. And I think that's something that doesn't really get brought up very often at all. Anyway, difficult question, but I hope I addressed it in a reasonable manner. Let's move on to an even worse question, frankly. Dinosaur Cola asked, who is the biggest fraud in Valorant history? I can't answer this. I'm going to answer it, but I shouldn't answer it. Naming one human being as an answer to this question is so mean. It's so mean. I mean, I guess I could pick someone that's done some horrendous shit in Valorant, but I don't want to talk about that kind of stuff. I want to keep it kind of gameplay focused, I suppose, because that's usually what we talk about, or at least that's usually what I talk about when I call someone a fraud, is that I usually use it in a joking manner as somebody that was touted as being excellent or able to achieve something, And in fact, they didn't or couldn't or wouldn't or failed to. So instead of just giving you one human being, because I think that just puts the focus so horribly on a single person and kind of calls them out in kind of a mean way. Instead, I'm going to name a lot of people, which I hope is going to be funnier and also just diffuse the responsibility of being the biggest fraud across many big frauds in the Valorant history. So let's talk first of all about organizations or teams, rosters that went on a run that was fraudulent. Ascend winning champions, fraudulent. That gets the stamp of fraudulent for me. Their team, disbanded afterwards, or at least made some roster moves around afterwards. The team had looked so up and down, even throughout the tournament, and just went on a fluky run towards the end in the playoffs. They had incredible performances coming out from CNED and Zeke, Starzo as well, but all of those players are really streaky, even when they're playing at their best, and most of those players have really not been able to perform particularly well after that win. So yeah, that gets a fluke award, the fraud award. Zeta Division's run to third place. Hello? Can I get a fraud check? Boom, that's a fraud. Third place for Zeta. Nobody saw it coming, or at least you shouldn't have seen it coming, because they were terrible before they started that event. And they've pretty much been a pretty bad team afterwards. They have been good enough to be able to get, recently into champions by winning LCQ. But my God, this team has just been kind of disastrous. In terms of, if you really thought that they were capable of being able to do that over and over again, they've just never been able to replicate it in any degree. There's also a bunch of hyped up players, right? When we talk about frauds, maybe you'd be thinking about one of the hyped up players from Counter-Strike or Overwatch or something like that just didn't end up doing much. Corey is one of them that springs to mind. He was a phenomenally talented player in Overwatch, and also just a raw aim, extraordinary player, and yet he really hasn't done much in Valorant at all, which I was disappointed about, thinking back on that old FaZe team and the people that were super hyped up when the game was first beginning. Corey's been around, tier 2, tier 3, not tier 3, actually. He's been pretty solidly tier 2 the entire time. But he's just been middle of the pack tier 2. He's not even really been that great. So that's an unfortunate one. Mixwell, another player, super good from Counter-Strike, came over, looked amazing at the beginning of Valorant as well. He was playing his Viper, playing his Jet, playing the Operator. And then as time's gone on, I feel like he's just slipped down and down and down, and is now just kind of occupying a space as the grandfather of Spanish Valorant, where he's not really doing very much in terms of his pro play at all. If we move up another tier again, I feel like Yampy is another player that got super hyped up from Counter-Strike that really hasn't done as much as people were hoping for. He's had some great moments. He's had some tournaments where he's looked excellent. He's had some tournaments where he's looked like their best player, actually. I think it was LCQ of last year, 2022, where Yampy was part of their double operator strat, and he was playing flex for the team, and he looked phenomenal. He had 0.95 KPR while playing Astra and stuff. But most of his career in Valorant has been typified by really unusual decision-making, to the point of looking like he's feeding sometimes, and generally being a little unreliable despite being a good player. And I think that's, considering the hype that was surrounding him from CS and coming into Valorant, I think that people were hoping for a little more than that from Yampy. We could just be naming tons of people during this segment of fraudulent players who shouldn't have even been allowed to compete in Valorant, at least for a certain period of time, because they were match fixing their balls off in Counter-Strike in the tier 2 scene. And have we seen any consequences? Any consequences over there? Any consequences over there? Nope, guess not. So they all got away with it, all good. But yeah, bit fraudulent. Then you've got your classic underperformers, people like Soulcast, Russ, Nags, Klaus. I'm sure there's tons more individuals that I could potentially name here as well. People that have been on big teams, but have constantly been towards the bottom of the pack for a large period of time. I mean, this year you could throw like Taco in there as well, although I think that's more of a mentality thing. Although you could argue the same for Soulcast too, right? So yeah, I mean, those people, you could maybe throw in the fraud bag too. And then you've got your people who are like overhyped, super popular, but don't actually live up to the hype. People like the classic Korean Jet of Soldam. Don't think he's really lived up to the hype. I can't even remember the name of the other person, actually. There was another Korean Jet player that was like Hyuni? Was that it? I mean, Hyuni... The problem with Hyuni is he looked good, immediately got signed, put on the bench. They did nothing with him. Wasted potential, frankly, isn't it? But then I think I would also put people like Tens in this group of being overhyped and not really delivering, having a pretty poor career, all things concerned, especially considering the teams that he's played with. He has won a Masters, though, and he's been in some fairly successful lineups, but overall, I think overhyped and under-delivering. Then you've got your IGLs. IGLs and coaches are probably some of the most fraudulent, but they're the most difficult for us on the outside to know that they're fraudulent as well. But some IGLs that just didn't really IGL, people like Marved, people like Rooney, who I think other people on the team were having way more of an impact in the communications department than they were, despite being labeled as the IGL. Fucking Ascend way back when their coach was calling for them, when NBS commed for them and they won Masters 1 in EMEA. Does anyone remember that? That's a fraudulent win. Pipson was calling for teams allegedly. There wasn't very much proof of it, but allegedly he was calling for teams in his online play. I think Coldamenta tweeted about it on Giants a while back, and then there was clips of him being in the comms when he shouldn't be for G2 as well. So Pipson, other coaches who just fail upwards throughout the scene the entire time, and some current active coaches like Termi, who seem to be doing their level best to stop their teams from winning by making wild decisions on a regular basis. So, you know, there's a whole bucket of frauds, frankly, isn't there? And hopefully that diffused things enough that no one of them feels as bad about it. They're in good company, I suppose. All right, let's move on to the next question from Jabradle, who says, what in the last few years of your career are you proudest of? And I'm going to keep this pretty short and sweet. I am most proud recently in my career of the successful pivot to Valorant, and specifically pushing forward the Valorant product throughout 2022 and 2023. Listen, I worked my fucking ass off to move into Valorant. I did not want to be one of those people that just rode the fucking wave of being good in another esport and then just was kind of shit in Valorant. I've seen that a lot. I've seen people, because commentary people and in general, like, well, yeah, I mean, I'll keep this specific to commentary people, because commentary, you sometimes have to jump from one game to another. There's a lot of people, I saw it in the Overwatch League very specifically, of people who just phone it in. People who move over into another game and they don't try to really capture the same stuff that made them excellent the first time around, which is throwing yourself in the community, understanding everything about the game, really trying to talk to all the players and get all of the like knowledge that you possibly can to put that into the broadcast. So I never wanted to phone it in. I was doing a huge amount of effort at the beginning, and I'm very happy with the work that I'm now putting out. And specifically, I'm happy with the improvements that I've personally pushed throughout the 2022 product in particular for VCT, but also some this year as well, where by being involved in the desk particularly, but also in the cast, I feel like I've elevated the product. It's a lot of stuff behind the scenes, but basically when I first came in 2022, there was a lot of stuff in the broadcast that still worked in a really amateur way, and I brought my experience from working on the Overwatch League and my experience of just having an understanding of how these things should operate to fix a lot of the internal systems. Actually, I shouldn't say a lot of the internal systems. That's a bit too arrogant. But I fixed a good number, 4 or 5 really key internal systems to try and push the product to a much more... to a much better place where people were actually working together and working in a way that was efficient and creating a story-focused product. And I think I've done some useful stuff with Americas this year as well, although the product was already in a pretty decent spot because of the work done in 2022. So yeah, I'm very proud of that. Let's move forwards to another one from Messenger One, who says, how do you handle the work-life balance with all the travel specifically? Does that much travel make you take stay-at-home holidays, or would you still go traveling for the holidays? And are you happy with the current balance you have? If not, do you think next year's Valorant calendar will help with that? Let's start from the beginning. There was kind of a bunch of questions all mangled into one there, which is, how do I handle the work-life balance with all the travel specifically? This was the first year that I can remember where I actually felt burnt out. It was in, I think, probably about Tokyo time, where I felt really burnt out. And to be honest, this year I've been taking it a bit easier than 2022 in general, just because when my brother died at the end of 2022, I didn't really have all of the mental bandwidth to be able to approach my work with the same 110% capacity that I did in 2022. For example, in 2022, at the beginning of every tournament, I was rewatching all of the VODs that all of the teams had done. I was making specific notes about all of their piss around strats, all of their set plays. I was gathering specific stats for all of the players, making my own stats database, looking for all of the interviews, reading everything, going through all of the YouTube stuff. And so I stopped doing as much of the stats stuff and left that to the people at VCT. And I relied much more on kind of hearing things from other people rather than going and finding if someone told me that X was, let me think of an example. If someone told me that a certain player was, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example from an interview, but, if someone told me that a certain player was an IGL and they said, oh yeah, I heard it in this interview, I'd be like, all right, cool, and just write down that they were the IGL rather than going and listening to the interview myself, stuff like that. And yeah, so I took it a little more casual on the work side, but still a little more casual for me. It's still extremely seriously, to be honest. And I that was my main approach to it, was just trying to dial back a little bit whenever I felt myself getting burnt out. But also trying to really find the enjoyment in my work, trying to throw myself into the stuff that I enjoy doing. So if I really feel like co-streaming, going fucking hard with the co-streaming so that I feel really rewarded from that. If I feel like going crazy on prepping a certain game because it really fills me with a joy and excitement for it, then go crazy with it. Don't try and pull back in those moments, because that's when you're the most engaged and least likely to be burnt out from it. In terms of the travel making me take stay-at-home holidays or going traveling for holidays, I think Beth wants to go around Europe. Now, she's in the other room right now, so I don't want to say this too loudly, but I don't know whether I can be fucked traveling around Europe during the off-season when I've just done a bunch of traveling. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's only September at the moment. By the time December rolls around or something, maybe I'll be down for a trip to Paris. Go and see all the Carmine Core fans. Do I think next year's Valorant calendar is going to help with that? No. I think next year's Valorant calendar looks like it's going to be just as brutal, if not more brutal, for the broadcast side of things, especially if you're somebody like me that ends up traveling to all of the events. So, yeah, I think that's going to be difficult, but in some ways, kind of like the players, you just have to kind of tough it out and do it. I mean, we have a really long off season. We have 5 months at the end of the year, 4 months at the end of the year, where I don't have to do very much at all. I turn up for Plat Chat, I read what's going on around the scene, I do some videos on YouTube and Twitch if I want to do them, and if I don't want to, I don't have to. That's an extraordinarily good job. And so if that means I have to work really hard for 7 months out of the year and get burnt out a little bit, then so be it. I just got to kind of remind myself of that. Okay, and final question, which is from TJ for Kicks. Were there any casters you looked up to when you started casting? And for this one, yeah, when I first started casting, I was doing Team Fortress 2, right? So there were definitely some TF2 casters that were my immediate role models, because those were the people that I could most closely look up to and see what they did and learn from. And then as I started getting better at TF2 and getting towards the top of the TF2 scene, then I started, looking outside of the scene, looking at Counter-Strike casters in particular, and the Counter-Strike desk, because at the time, the Counter-Strike desk was way, way better than everything else that was going on in terms of desk and podcast kind of stuff. They just had a fluidity and a banter to it that wasn't really found anywhere else. Everywhere else was way too buttoned up, polished. I suppose you could argue Monty on the League desks had something similar going on, but I think the fact that there was a few of them in Counter-Strike that they were able to bounce across really made it feel different. And I mean, obviously, when I'm mentioning names here as well, it doesn't mean by any means that I agree with the things that they do online or their own personal ethics or whatever, but there were certainly a lot of people involved in Counter-Strike, and in particular, that inspired me to be much more work focused and realize that if I apply myself to stuff, I can get to that point. And also a bunch of Counter-Strike people that specifically helped me in very specific situations as well. Like, for example, applying for my visa, you need to have certain like accredited people within the space to sign off and say, yeah, this person is actually talented and deserves an O1 visa, which is like for extraordinary ability or something. What do they call them? I can't remember. But yeah, so people like Anderson Semler, I watched a lot of their casting. People like Henry G and Sadokist, I watched a lot of, and I really liked the way that Henry G was approaching things. And at the time, I wasn't very showmanship heavy at all. I was I don't know whether I'd say very buttoned up, but I was either buttoned up or goofy. I didn't really have the charisma, showmanship, gravitas element at all. And that, I think, was one of the things that Henry G did phenomenally in his casting. I also learned a lot from the desk, from desks hosted by people like Richard Lewis, with the desks with Thorin, and specifically a lot of the stuff that Thorin's done around his like talking to camera stuff. I mean, similar videos to this kind of thing. And a lot of the ways that he spoke about improving and developing himself was extremely useful for me in particular, because I was doing the same kind of stuff when I first started getting into Overwatch, more journalist-centric. Richard Lewis has also been an extremely good resource in terms of like actually learning about journalism within esports, which was something I did before I got into casting too. Monty has always been a pretty big, what's the word? Don't know whether role model is correct so much as somebody to learn from. I almost like an indirect mentor figure, in the sense that it's not like Monty is, sat down teaching me things, more so that I did watch a lot of the content that he produced and took learnings away from it of like best practices, of like what he was talking about the esports industry, learning from what he would discuss and what other people would discuss on various different like Talking Heads podcasts, in order to just further my knowledge. Just in general, learning from as many resources that were open to me as possible. And those are the names that spring to mind. But yeah, a lot of the casting was Counter-Strike casting. And then once I was actually involved in the Overwatch League as well, learning from my peers. So people like Puckett on the desk, who was fantastic at teaching me how the actual like best practices for desks should be created, at least if you want things to be very American sports focused. And yeah, there are certainly other casters as well that were excellent, like Uber, like Mitch, for example. But I wouldn't say that I really looked up to them, because I just don't think that I can emulate that kind of style and I don't do play-by-play either. Within Valorant, Sean Gares, definitely when I started doing Valorant casting and Valorant analysis, Sean was somebody I massively looked up to, because Sean's excellent at being able to analyze the macro kind of stuff and the micro of like, this piece of utility is good, this peak is good, this angle is good, this rotation is good. And those require a very different like knowledge base to pull from. You could watch all the Valorant in the world and you might still not understand some more fundamental concepts about like whether a certain lineup is good or whether a certain like angle is good, because you need to really think about that from a player's perspective in order to understand it. So that was something that I really started doing a lot more coming into Valorant too. So yeah, those are some of the people that I looked up to when I started casting various different games that I've done as well. Let's get this horrendous lower third out of the way as well, and just remind you guys to subscribe. If you're interested in some more Valorant content, then this is the channel for you. If you're interested in more of my, esoteric content creation stuff, then you can take a look at my main channel as well. Have a scroll down, see if you're subscribed. This is a different channel that's Valorant specific, so plenty of you, about a third of you at least, will not be subscribed to the channel when you're listening to this. If you got to the end of the video, appreciate it. This is just a bit of a filler video while I really work on some of the more, the larger videos that I've got coming. For example, this one where I'm analyzing Tenz's footage is taking a little longer than I thought. So yeah, wait around for that. We will actually have some VOD review stuff coming soon. Thanks for watching. See you next time.